Welcome to Grounded and Soaring, our podcast that explores how we might raise healthy kids in a too often unhealthy world. I'm Sam Shapiro, head of school at Marin Montessori School. And today I'm joined by Anahad O'Connor, who is a Marin Montessori School parent, best-selling author, and award-winning columnist for the Washington Post, where he writes about health and nutrition. Anahad began his career at the New York Times, where he was a staff reporter covering health and nutrition for the Times Science section. And in 2018, Anahad was part of a team of Times reporters that won an award for publishing a groundbreaking investigative series that examined the food industry's role in the global spread of obesity. Anahad's work has been featured in the Best American Science Writing Anthology, and last year he was a finalist for the James Beard Award. Anahad's the author of 4 books, 2 of which were bestsellers, including The 10 Things You Need to Eat, which was published by HarperCollins in 2009. Anahad lives in Marin with his wife, Tsemi, a women's rights attorney, and their 2 children, Parker and Isabella. Welcome, Anahad.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I really appreciate you having me on the show.
Great. Anahad, maybe we could just start now. You are, what is your official title at the Washington Post right now?
Yeah, so I am a columnist, a health columnist, and I focus these days on nutrition, and I write for the Washington Post's wellness section.
Can you tell us sort of the origin story? How did you get into health and wellness generally and nutrition specifically?
Yeah, so long story short, my parents were hippies
Okay.
in New York. They were vegetarians and really into meditation and mindfulness, and they raised me as a vegetarian. So I grew up, thinking about food in a different way and thinking a lot about nutrition, and learned about nutrients and, was even in the 1980s as a little kid, my parents were into like juicing and, using supplements like spirulina and greens. And so that was a big part of my childhood. And then when I got to college, I had always been interested in science.
Mhm.
And I was doing pre-med and psychology as an undergrad at Yale University, and thought I was going to become a doctor. And I had always been interested in writing. And English was one of my best subjects in college, even though I was pre-med. And I started writing for the Yale Daily News college newspaper because I thought that would be a good extracurricular activity to have on my med school application.
Wow.
And I just discovered that I really enjoyed writing about health and science. And I got an internship at the New York Times on the science desk. And I started writing, science and health stories, and would get a lot of feedback from readers and from politicians. And
Mm.
I could see that my articles were having a public health impact. And so I thought, well, if I do science journalism, that is a way to have a potentially big public health impact. And so I started, focusing on writing about health and wellness, and saw that, I just loved the feedback I got from people and loved that I could give people practical advice that I personally was interested in.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. When you look at the landscape now and everything you've learned and you're learning, and it feels like information on health and wellness, especially around nutrition, changes a lot. New evidence comes out, debunks old ideas, etc. What do you're raising a family right now, you and your wife Tsemi, 2 young children. When you think about your family's overall health and wellness, what are some of your top priorities and why?
Yeah, so I have a number of them, and you're right. I pay a lot of attention to research on health and wellness because it's constantly evolving, especially in an area like nutrition. But I think Tsemi and I are both really interested in improving our health for a number of reasons. Because we know that we just feel better generally when we are taking care of our health, but also because we care so much about our children, Parker, who's now almost 5, and Isabella, who's 2. And we see that as a way to, if we can protect our health and try to be around for as long as possible for them, that benefits them, but also so we can model good behaviors for them. It's such a big part of a child's development, their nutrition, their mental health, their physical activity, their stress levels. Those are things we pay a lot of attention to. And so I like to use the analogy of the oxygen mask on an airplane. like you need to, in a crisis, you need to have your oxygen mask on first so that you can help others. And so I feel like if we are engaging in healthy behaviors and modeling those healthy behaviors, then that's going to benefit our kids as well. And so I have a number of priorities that I like to focus on.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and I think it's just so true that what we model for our kids in our daily behavior is the most impactful teacher. Um, do you, and for your maybe for yourself personally, so starting with the oxygen mask analogy, um, for you to keep at your to try to sustain a sort of prime level of wellness, so you can be a great parent to Parker and Isabella. What are your practices that you have found to be most important top practices?
Yeah, so I'd say the number one thing for me, and it's interesting because, when Tessemi was pregnant, like most parents, we read a lot of the books on child development and how to raise a happy baby. And so I thought about, okay, what books do I want to read? Parker, what are the things that can help him develop cognitively and develop into a, smart, intelligent, healthy, child. But I realized over the years that the number one sort of thing I needed to focus on and prioritize is sleep. And that is something that I think will resonate with a lot of people because I feel like a lot of us, sleep is an area that we all know we need to improve upon, and we could all use a little bit more sleep. But I noticed that on days when I don't get enough sleep, it's hard for me to be the parent that I want to be because, and research backs this up, but sleep is so important to your emotional and mental health, your emotional regulation. Parker is almost 5 and he is just full of energy and he's so happy and just wants to do tons of activities. But if I haven't slept well, then it's hard for me to have the energy to keep up with him. Or, if there are times when Parker or Isabella, are, maybe having some difficulties or having even a meltdown or something, and you need to try to remain calm and respond to them in a positive way. It's hard to do that if you're tired and you don't have the emotional regulation. It's hard for you to be patient. And so I've noticed that on days when I sleep really well, then I can be much more engaged and much more present and have much more positive experiences and be able to implement the practices that I want to model for them, the good behaviors. And also a lot of things flow from good sleep. If I've slept well, then you make better food choices and decisions. You have more energy to exercise and to suggest, if it's a weekend and I'm home with Parker, hey, let's go outside and play soccer. Let's do something physical outside. Let's be active and do the things that they like to do. So sleep is so important both for the parents so that you can be there and be present for your kid and have the energy and the patience and the mental sort of sanity, but also for your kids, to make sure that they get proper sleep. Because I think, as parents, we all know what happens when it's, nighttime and your child is exhausted and they need to get to bed. They can be an emotional mess. So we see how sleep affects them, but I think a lot of times we overlook how sleep affects us and how important it is to us as parents.
What have you found some key practices that have really helped you get the sleep that is optimal?
Yeah, so it's some of the things that we all know we need to do, but we just have to push ourselves to do it. So a big thing is, being able to put our phones down at the right time. And a lot of studies have shown that, when they take people who are sleep deprived and sleeping less than, let's say, 6 or even 5.5 hours a night, and they look for interventions that can help them get a longer sleep duration at night, one of the big things is just getting them to put their phones down at the right time. So I set a nightly limit for myself. I've got to put the phone down by 9 p.m. And then it's lights off, lay in bed, and then that ensures that I'm in bed laying there long enough to get at least 7 hours. So if I say, okay, it's lights out at 9 o'clock, my children are early risers. They can wake up anywhere from 5:30 to 6:30, sometimes even earlier. But if I'm asleep around 9 o'clock, that's 8 hours of 5 a.m. comes around. So I know, okay, I've been in bed for 8 hours and I've probably gotten at least, 7 hours of good quality sleep, something in that range. And so I'm ready to go. a lot of times when people have trouble falling asleep, or some form of insomnia, a lot of times it's because they're thinking of things that are, making them wired. And scientists
Wow.
call it the tired but wired syndrome. Maybe you're thinking about work, or you're thinking about, some problem you have in your life, and that's causing, the adrenaline to start flowing, and that is keeping you awake. But if you can distract yourself and think about something that's going to maybe, calm you down a little bit, or, not get you worked up, that's going to make a big difference. So there are actually a lot of techniques that people use. So, like you said, counting, breath control, breathing techniques. There are things you can do. So I've heard of a number of techniques that people use, but some people think about childhood experiences.
Hmm.
There are people who will transport themselves back to their childhood, to a place that was very comforting when they were a child. Maybe it was their school library. They picture themselves back in their school library, and they're walking around and they're looking at the pictures on the wall, picking out books. They're doing something, they're picturing themselves very in an environment or setting that's very calming. And a lot of sleep experts will recommend that people, if you're laying in bed for more than typically 20 or 25 minutes and you haven't fallen asleep, then a lot of sleep experts will say that at that point you should get out of bed and, maybe get up and use the bathroom, or sit down and read a book, or do a crossword puzzle, something that's very quiet and soothing. And then when you start to feel, sleepy again, then you get back into bed. But because it can be sort of like Pavlovian, if you're laying in bed and you're feeling stress, and then you start stressing about, oh, I'm not falling asleep, and you just have this, sort of vicious cycle of worrying about falling back to sleep. And if that's something that's happening night after night, then your bed can become a place that you associate with stress, and you don't want that. You want it to be the place where that you associate with sleep. And the analogy I've heard from Dr. Matthew Walker, who's a sleep expert at UC Berkeley, is that you don't go and sit at your dinner table and wait till you get hungry.
Yeah, it's interesting when my boys, they're now 21 and 19, but when they were little, they got into chess. I want to say like, between 5 and 9 years old, they were pretty into it. And actually it's now had a renaissance. So my younger son's way back into it in college. But um, oftentimes there's like a year where before bed we would play chess together.
Mm.
And I remember it being so helpful for sleep because it was like, it's not because chess is boring, it's because it focused our brain on
Mm.
such kind of a singular spot. It
Mm.
kind of reminds me of listening to a podcast before you go to bed. You're kind of
Nice.
zeroing in the thoughts. It's not so diffuse.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like concentrating, right?
Right. That's right. That is concentration. Yeah.
Yeah, not that it's boring. You're like an Olympic archer, for example,
Right.
like calm his nerves. That in order to get the best shot, to concentrate, to focus, you need to calm yourself. You need to
Yeah.
have, these soothing thoughts and feelings, so that you're not nervous, you don't have tension, and you can, achieve your goal. Some of the most amazing research that's come out recently is that when you take people who have depression and anxiety and other sort of mental health struggles, and you put them on an intervention to lengthen their sleep, they see improvements in
Wow.
anxiety and all these mental health struggles, even psychosis. They see improvements when
Really?
they do these sleep
Well,
interventions.
isn't it actually cardiovascular improvement too? I feel like I've read.
Absolutely, because
Amazing.
your sleep affects your hormones, and it's not just cortisol and adrenaline, but also your insulin sensitivity. They've shown that if you sleep deprive someone for even one night, then your insulin sensitivity, your ability to regulate your glucose levels, diminishes dramatically.
Incredible.
All these things, yeah, it's both your mental health, but also cardiovascular and metabolic health as well.
I want to turn to nutrition, which is what you're writing on now. Is there, as a parent, in terms of working to keep yourself, with the oxygen mask analogy, at your prime, so you can be the best version of your parenting self? Is there a nutritional practice that you have found to be very impactful for your well-being as a parent? Both either you're practicing it and it helps your well-being, or you notice if you do the opposite, it really negatively or deleteriously impacts your well-being that day.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as someone who was a night owl, I'd often stay up late and then wake up late or later in the morning, and was never really into breakfast. I was more of a dinner person. I
Okay.
think my just circadian rhythm was kind of shifted toward later in the day.
Yeah.
But now I've really tried to focus on making sure that I get a healthy, nutritious, balanced breakfast, for a number of reasons, because that's, setting the tone for the day. If you're eating, junk for breakfast, then you're going to be more likely to want junk for lunch and for dinner. But also because there's been a lot of research showing that, our body, just as, most aspects of our biology operate on a circadian rhythm. We get tired at night, we feel wakeful in the morning. Our bodies are more optimized to metabolize food early in the morning.
Mm.
And so it's really important what you feed yourself, because the same meal in the morning can have a very different metabolic impact than the same meal, um, you know, at 8 o'clock at night.
Interesting. Interesting. I did not know that. Okay.
Yeah, your body's more optimized to metabolize sugars and carbs and fats early in the morning versus later in the
Mm.
day, because we just evolved over thousands of millions of years to metabolize nutrients earlier in the day. So
Mm.
I try to focus on having a really healthy, nutritious breakfast because it sets the tone for the day. With kids, I think a lot of us have realized as parents that, when your child is hungry or getting low blood sugar, then it's really hard for them to emotionally regulate and to be engaged. And so nutrition is so important, but it can be really difficult.
Are there any nutritional kind of power foods that you're like, oh, these are really good to introduce our kids to?
Yeah, so I think, as parents, we often start out thinking, that everything's going to go perfectly. Your child going to
Totally.
have a perfect diet. They're going to be eating salads and grilled chicken and tofu, and they're not going to be watching
Suddenly it's
TV.
mac and cheese and chicken nuggets, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and life gets in the way.
Right, right,
Realize that your kid has to go to birthday parties where there's cake and cookies and
right,
soda, and there's Halloween and there's Easter. I
right.
had forgotten how many holidays have candy associated. Uh, and so you have to be flexible, and you have to just introduce your child to as many foods as possible. And there's also the rule of 15,
Mm.
where studies have shown that if you introduce your child to a food and they don't like it, that doesn't mean they're not going to like it forever. That means that with a lot of foods, it can take up to 15 times or 15 exposures for them to start accepting it. So you have to reintroduce foods. Um, Obviously you want to introduce as many plant foods and vegetables and fruits as possible, but also I feel like cuisines and ethnic foods, different spice levels, just teach them that food is such a wide, broad, exciting world for them to discover. Um, so, and also you have to not be overly restrictive, because studies have shown that that can backfire. You can't say that your kids, can't have any candy or can't have any cake or can't have any cookies, because, you know, studies have shown that there was actually one interesting study where they took children and they exposed them to like a peach fruit flavored cookie that they rated as tasting okay. Um, and they took that same cookie and they put it in a jar and put it on a table out of reach where the children could see it all day, every day. And that fruit or that cookie became like the forbidden fruit, where even though they weren't particularly fond of that cookie, once they were finally given access to the cookie, they ate like five, six, 10 of them right away, because for them it was the forbidden fruit. And they thought, oh, this is going to be amazing just because there was such a high value placed on it. So I think one of the best approaches that has some evidence behind it is giving your child access to a lot of foods in the house, but just not having too many junk foods around. Giving your kid access to, you know, sort of nutritious, giving them access to a pantry where there's nutritious options, whether it's, yogurt covered raisins and, cheese crackers and giving them access to cheeses and carrots and fruits and vegetables, giving them a wide variety of options is one way to get them to eat a lot of nutritious foods and don't have a bunch of cookies and candies that are off limits that they can never have access to, because that's just going to backfire and teach them that, once they do have access to those things, that they should binge. And, you have to recognize that when they become adults, you don't want them to not eat any sugar or not eat any, junk foods, or to never indulge. You don't want them to exhibit necessarily extreme behaviors. You want them to be able to make good choices. There's been a lot of studies looking at some of the things that help children eat healthy foods. And you can do that by giving them agency and authority and involving them in the food and cooking process, taking them to the grocery store and giving them options. Some of the coolest research that I've seen is where they have shown that if you give children access to a garden where they can plant seeds and be involved in growing fruits and vegetables, and then they're involved in harvesting those fruits and vegetables and prepping and preparing them and cooking them, kids are much more likely to eat fruits and vegetables when they've been involved in the process all along. So a child is much more likely to consume butternut squash, for example, when they've been involved in that process of planting and growing and harvesting and prepping the butternut squash, versus a child who's just had a plate put in front of them. Another thing you can do is say, okay, we're going to prepare it in, two different ways. We're going to do roasted butternut squash, and then we're going to do, puree it and turn it into butternut squash soup. There's also been other interesting studies that show that children and adults really like variety. Our brains just really enjoy variety. And so if you want your kid to eat fruits or vegetables, then give them a plate with several different types of veggies or several different types of fruit. And then they're much more likely to eat the fruits or vegetables if there's a variety.
What you just described reminds me so much of Montessori education, which is, so much of what I've learned, especially from our early childhood educators, the toddler primary levels, is that idea of giving a limited choice, but there's always choice.
When they have a sense of ownership and participation, then they're much more likely to respond in a positive way.
Before we say goodbye, is there anything that you think, we missed, or I didn't ask you?
Yeah, I think a big thing is just being present, for your kid as much as you can, because, there will be moments that don't seem that important to you where the kid is really paying attention and where they are having a great time. And, so for me, a lot of times when I pick up Parker from school, I'll take him to, there's a park down the street from MMS where I'll take him at 4 o'clock and we'll kick a soccer ball around, and, I'll bring a football or something. And he loves, that 1 hour after school where we just get to go and be in the park by ourselves. And, there are times where I'm putting him to bed at night and I'll say, did you have a good day? How was it? Are you going to have good dreams? And he'll tell me that he's going to dream about, waking up the next day and going to play soccer with his dad, or going to play, catch at the park. And it's like those little moments, just that 1 hour I took to spend with him in the park was, such a positive experience for him. And I'm able to do that in part because I think a lot of us can be workaholics. We're in a sort of workaholic culture. But I've realized that it's okay to take a step back from work sometimes. Like I said, I used to be a night owl where I could stay up till 2 a.m. doing work, writing stories, doing research. And now I try to make sure I go to bed so that I can be present with my child. And, I've realized that cutting back on work a little bit hasn't actually negatively affected my work. In fact, I feel much more productive than ever because I'm sleeping well and I'm able to get so much more done during the day, and then, maybe wrap up work a little bit early to get to my, to spend that time with my son. So I think that not overworking yourself is something that we need to remind ourselves is okay. Because as I've heard some people say, 20 years from now, the only people that are going to remember that you worked late into the night or on the weekends are your kids and your spouse. So taking an extra hour a day, maybe closing the laptop a little early to spend that time with your, an extra 30 or 60 minutes with your kid can have such a huge impact on them. So that's something else that I've also prioritized.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's also what you brought up, I think, is a source of pain for a lot of us, right? Which
Mhm.
is the the conflict we feel between our drive for um, flourishing careers, our drive to have careers that allow us to afford the life we want to give to our kids, with the pull to want to be more present for our families. I'm so glad you are socializing this and elevating it, and also affirming that it's doable, and that you don't actually necessarily lose when you take some intentional time. They feel that, and there are fewer things that are kind of more of a valuable nurturing balm for them and their development. So I'm really grateful for you for closing us out with that reminder, but also your own personal experience with it. The fact that you are finding time each day to be like, just, shine your light on him and also with him, and get the advantage of his light.
Yeah, totally. Right. That's the thing, is we are lucky, right? It's such a
Very
joy.
lucky.
Fortunate to have.
So fortunate. Yeah, so fortunate. Okay. Well, I'm fortunate to have talked this time with you, Anahad. Thank you so much. This was a really rich conversation. I really appreciate it.
I enjoyed it. It was great talking to you. Thank
You
you.
too.